Let's fire this thing up. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mountain Deer Podcast. When we did our seminar a week ago, one of the things that I wanted to cover, and I never really got to it, was how far ahead the deer is from you, or how far behind you are on the deer. There's a whole bunch of big clues, and it's a subject that nobody really covers much. And there's a ton of talking that needs to be done about that, because your assessment of how far away the deer is and figuring that out is pretty important. And let's just take one of our hunts. I was just barely going through some older footage of stuff that we haven't shown anybody yet, and back in 21, we had snow on the very first day or second day of the season. I think it was the second day of the season. We had some beautiful snow. It was 4 or 5 inches of fluff. It was even down low closer to town. Even there was some snow, and we jumped on a buck. We named him Paul Crew because he was like the first 2.5-year-old halfway decent, 150, 60-pound buck that we came across, and we thought, well, he's super fresh. He's right here. He was giving us the signs. He was close by. It was a nice fresh track. And
it was our day 2. We actually did a video about it.
Right.
Yeah. We didn't go over. We didn't put everything into the video, but
right. Some of the nuances of that. I want to take a look at that a little bit. I want to go over that video. I want to remember that video, look at that and go. But it occurred to me that we didn't talk about that on the seminar, and it's a big important point, and it's something that really nobody's been touching on. And if you want to break new ground, you got to go where nobody's been, and this is one of the things. There's a whole bunch of small little clues that come along that tell you how far ahead the deer might be, and they come like in an importance as well. And we didn't get a chance to talk about that, and I wanted to.
Yeah. Well, so based on the time constraints that we had, we had 6 hours, which is not a ton when you want to talk about the entire spectrum of deer hunting and how we go about it and all the things that, and do on a daily basis during deer season.
Yeah, that's
there's
really
a lot.
tough.
There's a lot to go through. And just tracking alone is weeks and weeks and weeks of things that you could learn. You could sit down and just tear through it. It would take you a long time.
Sure. No, this was a little dead end road. We shot up the dead end road. It must have been, half a mile long, maybe. That little small roads. Yeah, it's not very far.
It's not too far off the main drag. It's kind of like a little short spur road that we just never really hit that often.
It's relatively flat road.
It's out through the greenery too. When you watch any of our videos, there's all those there's pretty big sections of where we hunt. That's just this giant, spruce tree kind of cornfield that really doesn't have much for feed. It's not really prime deer habitat, but they cut swaths through it, and they cut roads through it, and it's kind of just on the edge of that. And when you look at it from the road, you're like, meh, as far as whether you want to go in there. And we just happened to say, you know what, we had snow down low. Let's just burn out through here and see what happens.
And of course, from the road, it looks less accessible than it really is. You see it from the truck and you say, oh, those are terrible woods, and I don't want to go in there. You can only see 30 yards kind of stuff. And in most cases, that may be that's true. But there's also, there's places where they cut through with a buncher and stuff, and they've opened it up, and there's little paths through there. And of course, the deer love it. It's pretty good overhead cover and in cover. And we just drove up through that, and we came into some select hardwood cut above it. And that's where the deer was wanting to be. He was walking around in all of the in between hardwood, where they knocked a bunch of holes into the hardwoods everywhere and just made these big strips. And of course, now the goldenrod, the raspberry bushes, the young whips are growing like crazy.
Oh yeah,
those woods just screamed deer. They just you just step back and look at it and you say, this is deer woods. It's almost like the edge of lily pads when you're fishing. There. That's what this was. And the track had come across the road, and as it walked across the road, one of the first things I noticed about it was just how nonchalantly and carefully. Now, this was probably November 2nd or 3rd at the latest.
Yeah, it was within the first 3-4 days. It was 20. You say it was 2020? Or was it 20? Yes, it was.
I think it was 2020.
Then, yeah, because we had snow. 2020, we had snow for the first 3 days. So it was day 2, 2020 then.
Yeah. Yep. So the pacing of the step, first thing, and especially in the road and before the road and after the road, is real important to me. I love it when a track stops and checks the road before it crosses it. That could be an older deer, and that is good. When it listens and it doesn't like walking around in the middle of the road. I like that.
Experienced deer.
Yes.
It's been harassed from the road before.
This one here was real nonchalant and easy in the middle of the road. He didn't care.
We got ourselves a dumb one.
Right. So he's close, right? And it felt close right off the bat. So we follow him down the road for about 30 yards, and he cuts across the road, and he dives into a little spot there where you could go down into the woods. And there's on the edge of the greenery, there's usually a bunch of popples and wet land just above it, uphill from it a little bit. There's like an edge where there's tons of aspen along the edge of that. And he dove into those bigger, taller aspen, and it was beautiful in there, and you could see pretty good, and not much understory, not much boot brush. It was a little bit of
some
hardwood canopy.
Some old kind of skid trails down in there that were like packed a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell places where it wasn't freshly cut, but it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't growing up through as thick, and there were runways inside the old skid tracks that they were using that the whips weren't growing in, so you could walk pretty quiet. It wasn't too
Right.
dense understory. It was actually not bad.
As soon as you broke out of the popple trees and you got into the little drier, higher woods, and they had been in there with a bunch of the most recently and broke that up, and as soon as you come from that transition from the edge of greenery into some like popple trees that are pretty good size, some of them are 40-50 footers, some of them are pretty tall trees, and that was just like 100-yard wide zone of that, and then you broke into drier ground where they had just done maple hardwood select cut in there, and you broke into goldenrod. Right, so you went from this greenery into popples that you could walk underneath, and there was a few ferns and stuff, but there's really not much to eat in that little small, 100-yard zone. And then you broke into the goldenrod, right? As soon as you get in that goldenrod and that bushy, brushy stuff,
Fluffy.
Yeah, and it was crystal clear. The sun was shining, and it was like 4 inches of fluff and nice. Yeah. And as he went, he dove into the woods, and he walked down through there, and he walked real nonchalant. And just kind of he just taking nice, easy steps. And it wasn't real direct and really walking with purpose. He was just walking gently along, just like meandering, and like you would expect a buck to do. And
catchable.
Yeah, he was real catchable.
Yeah. Beginning of the season, not like driven for does yet, kind of just moseying around, eating, just walkabout, nothing.
Right. And odds are good. That's where he's been living right along here.
Yeah.
That's his
probably his home range.
Real core zone right there where he's doing his thing. Now, he breaks out into the goldenrod and stuff and some of the whips, and he does a little tiny bit of feeding. He stops here and stops there. So as soon as the pace slows down and it starts doing some snaking, that's another good sign that he's probably not real far away. Now, it'll be tough to know if he's bedded down right there or if he's going to keep feeding for a while, right? But you have to also look at what time of day it is that you come onto this track and what time the track was likely made. And we knew it was made during the night. There was no fluff in it at all. The snow, it was still spitting snow, and then a cloud would come through and throw some snow on us and then blow away, and the sun would
little
come right
squalls,
back out.
Kinda.
Yeah, these little tiny squalls. And it's probably 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. So, at the most, he's probably had 5 or 6 hours. I would say we're 5 or 6 hours from
which is pretty surprising. We're not normally in the woods that early.
Yeah, usually
it was the beginning of the seaan. We were amped up.
Yeah,
in the woods at a whole 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my God! Right. And we take him just a little ways, and he does a little bit of feeding, and then he walks for 50, 60 yards, and then takes a bite or 2 or 3 or 4, and he pulls up to a bush and plants all 4 feet and snips, and you can see the stuff he's eating off it, and then he'll turn and continue down the skid trail, and the skid trail's really kind of grown up a little bit, but there's where the one skid tire mark where all the game has been used, turning it into a trail. He's walking down that stuff, and he's just meandering nice and slow and easy, and we're probably up to about maybe 5 or 6 in the morning, or just breaking daylight probably in his time frame.
Yeah,
so
when
we're
he
now
was making it.
Yeah, we've probably just in the last we've gone 400 yards or so. He hasn't laid down any buck sign whatsoever, nope. But it does look like a buck track, and he's dragging his feet, and he's taking his time, and he's doing a lot of pull up and stop every 30 yards, and then walk, nice and gentle, and go for a ways and pull up and stop, but he's not really changing direction. He's
those deer that do that is a little bit. You really have to be careful with a deer that's got that kind of attitude. Mostly because if he's just walking and then stopping every now and then, the one thing you don't know is if he's just staying there kind of taking in his environment and listening, drift in the wind or whatever, you have no idea how long the intervals between when he's walking and when he's stopping are. And if they're not very far in distance, you have to go in there real quiet, nice and easy as you close the distance, because more likely than not, he's just standing there.
Yeah, and if he stood there
he's somewhere standing there.
4 minutes here and 6 minutes there, and then 15 minutes he ate. Yeah, I mean, when you watch a deer from a distance and you're in your tree stand or whatever, or sitting, and you watch a deer and you think, well, how long does it take him to go 50 yards?
It could be a long time.
Sometimes it takes quite a while, and you might only go like 100 yards, and you've shaved a half hour off in between you. So sometimes,
you close the distance so quickly because he's stopping so frequently, and you're not sure how long he's stopping for. Because if he walks and then stops for a couple seconds and then walks and stops again, you're not going to close the distance that quickly, but you don't know that.
Mm-hmm. And of course, because
you have to be super careful,
because you don't know it, you've got to gear down a little bit.
You go slow.
Got to go a little bit slower there, and this was good indications of not hurrying too much. As soon as we get out of the truck and we looked at it, it's like, oh, don't hurry too much.
Don't go super slow, but just kind of stay steady and really look.
Yeah, and like move through the woods the most efficiently to look it over the best you can without bumping things too bad, and. So we meander down a ways, and he goes for quite a distance of probably 300 yards or so farther past the 400 that we've already been. And then he all of a sudden stops in the middle of the skid trail, which continued in a direction that was pretty easy and walkable. And in the middle of this nice walkable path zone, he just comes to a stop and then just all of a sudden does a 90 to the left. And you and I were both like, oh, be careful. Mm-hmm. So as soon as that happens, we're both, and he's turned uphill slightly. There's just a little bit of a grade to the hillside, and he's turned uphill just a little bit, and he's crosswinding. He was going into the wind, and now he was going crosswind a little bit, and he did a 90 to the direction he was headed. He was headed kind of west, and all of a sudden he just turned south. So he goes for a ways, and then pulls up and stops. Now, as soon as he did that elbow, you and I were looking for islands. It's like, okay, he's going into the select cut hardwoods, and it's a pretty good sized patch. And we know that about every 100 yards or so, they took the buncher and they made these cuts out through select swings. So there's cross skid trails, strips ahead of us where this buck is going. And instead of going with the strips, now he's turned perpendicular to the strips. So we're looking those over, and up ahead about 150 yards, we could see this group of spruce right out in the middle of this hardwood select cut. So there's this little island of spruce. And as soon as he did that 90 and headed up towards, we both looked at that island and said, oh, right up there. Mm-hmm. So we focused mostly on the island, but we also, he's walking nice and gentle up through the woods, and he has just a little more purpose. He picked up the distances between his steps increased just a little bit, so he was walking nice and steady, and he just did that 90 and turned and headed right for that island. And you and I were thinking, okay, he's going to go right up there, and then he's going to hit the brakes. Yep. So we want to watch that island really hard. There was also a good-sized top that had blown down about 50 yards to the left of that, and we watched that really good too, right? Deer love to go up to an island of some kind, like a top,
like some structure,
some rock, a bunch of spruces, a
thicket, some kind.
Yeah, a transition of some kind of woods types, tree types, and of course, as soon as we looked up the hill there and we saw that about 150 yards, it's like, oh, we really want to focus on that. So we went up in there nice and slow and kept watching that real thoroughly. And it was actually a roof. There wasn't much greenery down to the ground. It was just like this, right head high, branches up kind of roof. And he went walking right up to it. So we really took our time. When we could see it good, we're looking it over good. And as we're getting up in there, his pace shortens a little bit, and he did just a little side to side, and then he pulls right up underneath that, and then almost does like a 15-foot hook, and just turns and goes back around and stands there kind of watching back his backtrack, and he stood underneath that island. And as we pulled up to it and we didn't see him anywhere, and we kept following the track, and then we got over to the tree, here it is. There's this spot where he looked at it, and he took his hooves, and he kind of like, I don't like it. It's soft and it's mushy right here, and it's not, this is where I want to lay down, but I just don't like this.
It's not quite right.
Yeah. And as soon as he did that, we were like, oh, we're close. Now, as we pull up to this island, we're looking for the next island. We're looking for deer, of course. Yep. But if we can't see any deer, we're looking at the transition zones ahead of us and figuring where he might be next. And there's another little bunch of spruce up there, and there's only like 2 of them. And there's just a little bit of a roof, but we can see right underneath it. And he's not underneath those trees up above either, as we're getting to the first transition. And then we look and we see he did this little 10-foot do-si-do, and you could tell he didn't like it. And then he walked away from it, and he headed up towards the next island. So now we're really focusing. We look at that island, and there's nothing in it, and we're looking out past it, and we're trying to find the next island beyond that. And we can see there's another one of those skid trails going crossways. So both of us are thinking, well, he went up into the next skid trail, and he's either standing in the next skid trail or he's going to hook downwind some more, because he was going into the wind. He did a 90. He tried to lay down, couldn't find anything, went more crossways 90 farther, and still didn't find anything. If you ask me, he's going to stick to the left, and he's going to hit that next skid trail and go down it. So we pull up to that. Now, we have come from branches of skid trails, and now we're going across the umbrella at the top. And if he turns, he's going to go right back down to the tracks where we just were. Now, we've already started a hook now of about 200 yards, where he's gone over, he's gone up, he's gone up a little farther. And when we get to that next skid trail and we look, sure enough, he's going downwind, right? So now we're almost screwed, because he's done this hook. And if we're on the wrong side of the hook, he's going to get us. And we're thinking, oh, man, hopefully we haven't ruined it. Now, the skid trail, fortunately, hooks to the right some. And we're in a little bit of a corner. So our wind isn't going all the way down the skid trail. It's blowing off to the side. And if he's like 100 yards ahead of us down the skid trail and there's a corner in it, and as soon as we hit that, I'm like, oh, we got to go look around that corner right there, because he's probably in the skid trail just a little farther down. And both of us, we've done about a 300-yard circle. We've gone 180 degrees, and we're almost back to our tracks.
Is so dangerous.
We're getting back to the track where we just walked through. Right, about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes before that.
Yeah, probably.
It's been 15, 20 minutes.
Closer up to the 20, yeah.
And now we've almost completed the teardrop shape, and we're just about back to our track, and we're going nice and easy. Keep looking around the corner, because he stayed in the
just
skid
to catch him standing there.
Yeah, we or at least walking away from us down the skid trail in front of us.
Yep.
And as we swing around, he just sticks with it, and then all of a sudden he just turns, and he's going right back to his track, and we're going
up our back track,
and we're going downwind towards our tracks and his tracks, and we're closing the circle, and we're heading right at the close of the circle, and the wind is the wrong way. So I told Taylor, I'm like, man, you get right on me. You just stay right in my pocket, because like we gotta clip right along, and we've got to go kind of quick. And when he closes the gap and he gets back to our tracks, he stops and he throws his foot out and he sniffs our track. And then the direction we went was to the left, and he steps to the right and sniffs the track, and then sniffs the track to the left. And then he turns and he comes right down the tracks, headed right back. So now we're tracking a buck that's tracking us.
When we were tracking him.
While we're still tracking him. So we've done this complete...
The penalty for that.
Oh, yeah. The only good part is he's now back on the upwind side of us.
Yes. So we have the downwind advantage.
So he's walking down our tracks.
And he's occupied. He's smelling us, and the scent, like he's smelling us from in front of him. It's like we're all around. We've done a good job stinking the place up.
Now I have no idea how he didn't manage to wind us, because we've done a 360 and the wind is right through there. But he was probably at the widest,
and
about
the trees,
200 yards,
and the trees dissipating it, and we both probably crossed the midline of the shape, and he was coming around onto our track as we were coming down around, and
yep. Now, of course, all of this is making our hair stand up, because we could be seeing this thing at any second.
Yeah.
And we want to be careful. So he goes down our tracks, I don't know, 100, 140, 40, 50 yards.
Quite a ways.
Yeah, and he's he's walking in our boot tracks, and he's sniffing us, and he's going right down his track, right down our tracks. And then he gets almost to where he did the first 90-degree left. He gets almost to it, and he does a 90-degree right off our tracks. And where does he go? Right towards those small spruce trees that were on the right-hand side of us to begin with. Back towards the road just a little bit, and he just does this 90 into the spruces beside us. Now, we're going slow because the wind is favorable.
Yep.
There's no need to hurry.
It's quiet walking too.
Yep.
So we can kind of take our time.
And also, the deer kind of knows something's up.
He needs to chill a little bit.
Yeah. Now, we don't need to hurry because he's walking on our tracks. We just left 15 minutes ago.
And it's like 10 o'clock.
Yeah,
so
first thing in the morning.
We got all day, so
right.
Whatever.
So we see where he does a 90, and he goes into the bushes right next to us. And these are about, 15-foot spruces?
Yeah.
And their branches go all the way to the ground.
Thick.
And there's a few little skid trails that cut down into that stuff.
And they do this, where they separate and come back together.
So
it's all these like
islands.
Weird. Yeah, they're all these little islands, and it's kind of a maze down in there.
And it's tight. Like, you can't see through it. It's a wall.
Oh, yeah. You cannot see through it. You can barely push through it.
So we're thinking, well, what do we do now? Right? Because he has crawled into that stuff, and odds are good, at 15 or 20 feet inside of that stuff, we're not going to get a shot. And this isn't good. And if he goes into that stuff and lays down,
we're in trouble.
We're in trouble, because we'll have to kick him out of there and get it going a little bit.
A lot of times that's what you have to do. If they're in a spot where they have the advantage, and there's no reason for them to come out, you have to go down and shove them.
And of course, we're being super quiet. Now is when you don't make a single snap at all.
No calling. Don't even.
Right. Because we're about 100 yards from the deer. We figured the deer's within 100 yards of us. And just the way he did a 90, and he walked nonchalantly, like he didn't even care, to the right. He'd been walking on our tracks for 200 yards, and then just like, I don't even care, and he just does this right-hand turn, and he goes down into one of these little small spots that he can get through, and crawls through this absolute garbage, and then stops right inside of it. So,
in like a perfect little hole off to the left.
Yeah. So we look where he's going down in, and I thought, well, let's take the next one to the left downwind. There's the right downwind. We'll take the next skid trail that's only about 25 yards downwind of where he went in, because odds are good that he'll go in there, and the wind is coming. We're at the most western end of where he has come, and the wind is blowing west to east. And odds are good, last time he went and hooked downwind to the left, this time he should go in and hook downwind to the right. So I thought, well, let's stay on the downwind side. We have a little bit of a shooting lane.
And we'll just try to run into him.
And we'll walk real slow down that. And if he's in that real thick stuff and he comes into our shooting lane and we can see down through there, we might stand a chance.
Yep.
Unbeknownst to us, the thing's at like 35 yards. He's only 35 yards from us.
Yeah.
So we step back a little bit and we go real slow and quiet down this little side trail. And he's actually crawled through a little bit of noisy stuff. And there's this little tiny pocket of open in these green branches.
Inside of a green strip.
Yeah. Some of these trees are only 8 inches apart. I mean, it's really, really tight spruces, rabbit jail, big time.
Yeah.
And he's gone into that and he's thinking about parking. And we come down that side trail. And we're going super slow and quiet. And I don't know if he could see our boots or he could hear us. He
definitely didn't wind us because we were just right. And we had just enough breeze it was a little blustery, or it was good. He had to have just seen us a little bit.
Spectacular conditions.
You know what I mean? Like we were on it.
And we probably should have just stood there in that trail and waited. If we'd have gone super slow and waited, he might have come into it with us.
Yeah, but had he
just laid down,
had he laid down and stood there for 4 hours, it wouldn't have mattered. I think we were gonna blow it no matter what.
Now
it was just a bad spot for us.
We must have taken 10, 15 minutes to go 100 yards, and we were just a step at a time.
100 yards,
yeah, just a step at a time, and we get right up to about 15 yards from him. And he's just inside this stuff. And we pull right up to about 15 yards. And he blows at us and smashes through the stuff. And he goes back towards where he just came from.
He left a Wile E. Coyote print like this.
Yeah.
Into the trees.
Into the snow-covered trees.
Bugs Bunny hole right through the...
Yeah. We scared the living snot out of him, and he came smashing out of there. Now, we were only about 30 yards from being in the open where we could see him. And as soon as he took off, the two of us turned around and ran like crazy, right? To get back out into the open where he was running. Where he was running was wide open.
Yeah.
In the time it took us to go 15 yards, he covered 100.
He left there on fire. We hit him. We were so close when we hit him that he was motivated.
We were right on top of him. And in a way he went. Now he turns it on.
It's like, here we go.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a young deer. He's going to freak.
Yeah.
He's going to run over here real hard and run over there real hard. And it's like, we're in for a day now.
Now, of course, we weren't super interested in shooting him because he wasn't that big a deer.
But it was one that we could film. And it's like, especially me, like I'm a little less picky about the size of a buck. As long as I can track one down and, I'm happy with that. So it was like, well, I know, Dad, it wasn't really making you. No, you weren't real wound up. But I was like, hey, if I'll shoot this thing on camera. If we can get it on film, I'll shoot this thing, no problem. But it was a great, which is why we had named him what we did. We're like, this is just, it's not a buck that we're like really interested in, but like it's a good tune-up game. It's good practice. Beginning of the season, for anyone who's seen Longest Yard, the tune-up game thing was like, it's a good reference. So we're like, it's a good tune-up game.
Right.
So we're like, well, we were into it this far, so let's see what happens throughout the day. Let's take them. Let's have a little learning session here. Let's just go for it.
Sometimes when you get on a track and the deer are holding a line and they're walking with real purpose and they're holding a general direction and they hold it for a long period of time, odds are good they're out there. And they may be out there a long
and they're covering some
ways.
Distance, so
yeah. And not that they don't meander and go around tops and this and that, but when they take off and like they head in a generally westerly direction or whatever direction they're going, and they just hold it and they go for a long ways and they keep the steps, especially a decent distance apart as he's walking. He's like on the interstate and he's just going. Those are the deer that you just haul because they're out there. They're not going to be real close generally. Once in a while, they might lay down on their track all of a sudden. We've only had a couple 3 buck like in my whole lifetime that were just monsters. They were on the highway, and then all of a sudden they just stopped in the middle of the highway and laid down.
Just parked it.
That's pretty rare, especially in the middle of the track. They almost always pull up and then step off to one side or the other.
There's always a sign in the track that they're going to lay down at least a little bit. It's pretty uncommon for you to just be like, and just lay down in the middle of the floor on your way to the kitchen.
The ones who do park like that, though, they get you.
Oh, because they catch you off guard.
Yep.
You'll probably see more deer doing that because all those ones live.
Another thing is like when a deer's just walking along and his tracks are always spaced and he's just going, and then all of a sudden he does a double. When they call, he parks both front feet together and he just stands there for a minute. When they just stop, and it's not uncommon for him to leave their back legs staggered and stop the front legs. And all of a sudden there'll be this like double of 2 front legs where he just stopped and you could tell he took in the view. He took a breather for a second.
Listening, smelling something.
Those are indications.
He's doing something.
Yeah, and most of the time they stop for a reason. They smell something. They just want to take in the view. You do the same thing when you're walking. Before you come into a hole or something, you stop and you take a break. It's the same kind of thing. So like that's an indicator of, let's be careful. Then as you move along, if he does that consecutively quite a few times in a fairly short distance, and if each time the direction is a little more canted, he pulls up, does a double, then he goes a little bit more to the left, and then does a double, and then goes a little bit more to the left. Now you're all of a sudden he may not be that far away. It doesn't mean that sometimes, especially during the second week when they're in the zombie walk and stuff, they'll pull up and have something to eat and then just take off and go. And they might take a nip here and a nip there and just keep right on trucking.
A little road snack where they just grab a bite and just keep walking.
Yeah, so you'll see that. And provided it doesn't change its general direction all of a sudden, anytime there's a 90, that's when there's something up. And I start looking for transitions as soon as I hit that 90. I'm looking for changes in the forest types. I'm looking for islands.
Topography.
Like a big blowdown, a big rock, something that would hide him. He can go out around it, feel good, lay down, or even just be feeding like on a top with old man's beard. Yep. All that kind of stuff. You're looking for that all the time. And as soon as he like pulls up to a top and starts eating moss off a rock, or he starts eating old man's beard, and then he wanders around the top some more, boy, it's time to really start looking. Especially if he eats any amount of green moss, most of the time 100 yards, they want to lay down. But all those things are partial indicators. If he's checking tracks is another thing. When you're following a buck and he comes to other deer, he'll throw out his foot and sniff all those other tracks over. He'll join a runway and go up it for a ways. As soon as I follow a buck onto a runway of other tracks, that intersection where that meets up, I want to look at the ground. I want to make sure that I also want to look and see if he went this way and that way. I'm checking to see if he definitely went to the right or to the left, whichever direction he picks when he hits that. I want to make sure that he didn't just go up there a ways, turn around and come back, and he's actually out here, and I went to the right, and then say I walked on top of the tracks, or I screwed him up, and I walked by where he turned around and came back because the scent was getting weaker.
Yeah.
Younger bucks especially will start onto a deer trail, and they might go out a ways before they determine that they're going the wrong way, and then do a spin around and come back and go to where the deer. See, when a deer looks at a deer track, he can't tell which way it's going except for the amount of smell. So an older buck may just be able to stick his nose down this way and his nose down that way and say, okay, this is where they went, and tell that faintness right away. And a younger one may have to smell it a little bit more. He may not be quite so thorough in his nose work because he hasn't done enough of it. So the experience of them, and as soon as that meets up, I'm looking in the track to see if it could have gone the other way as well. And I don't like to walk on those intersections where deer meet up with other deer. I don't like to disturb that. If I need to come back and look at it, I want to.
Yeah, don't ever walk on the intersection of tracks. It's okay to walk on your track because you're going to walk on your track a little bit. But if there are changes in direction, if there are stops, anytime that he stops or he turns left, he turns right, any of those kind of transitions in his own track, or when he comes up to intersections of other tracks, don't ever walk on that, because if you get turned around or if things get messed up, you're going to need to come back to that, and that'll be your kind of like your checkpoint, that your reference point to say, okay, I do have the right track, because he might be going into a mess of other tracks, and you might kind of get it lost and have to swing and, do I have the right track? And you have to go back and look at your track and get back on it. And you don't want to walk all over that, because that's the only evidence you have.
Say you have a buck and a doe, or a buck with two does, and he's tending, and you're on another buck that finds these three other deer. And now you have two buck that are about the same size, and making sure you're sticking with the one that you started with, or if you want to switch up, right? Whichever one you want, that's another indicator. So, and especially if they get into a barnyard and they're circling, if I follow a buck into some other deer and the other deer pull into a barnyard, and now there's kind of a whole bunch of tracks going every which way, but it looks obvious that it seems to be two buck, and that both bucks will probably be interested in each other shortly when they do get together. and they do meet up. As they start into that barnyard, and I'm hopefully selecting the downwind side of the barnyard, and I'm watching for an exit of one of the deer. As soon as I have to leave those tracks or whatever, I'm really paying attention from now on. And again, calling will start to be good. You need to go slow until you kind of cipher it out. It doesn't mean that the deer are in the barnyard, but also too, you don't know if they're gone. And barnyards are something that will just eat up your time no matter what. And you're going to have to cipher it out a little bit. So I just start the swing around, and I'm staying with the main group of tracks. And if there's just some kind of loop, and the deer will start doing a lot of looping, especially in the chase phase. You get into like week number 3, and they're all pestering each other, and they're going around and they're circling someplace where the does feel secure. And you take that downwind side of the barnyard, and I look for exit tracks, and any tracks that are coming in, I ignore them. If say the barnyard's on my left, any buck track exiting to the right, I'm making a note of it. And if there's any giant runway of deer that goes to the right, I'm probably taking that as well, and just making sure that everything's good. If I do have it like a runway going to the right, and it does seem to be leaving, I'll look it over the best I can. And if I want to finish a barnyard and make sure this is the direction they went and finish my circle, I will sweep a section of that with my foot. Like that main runway, I'll sweep it with my foot so that if any new deer go through while I'm gone, when I come back here in 10 minutes, I'll know. So then I finish, like there's a big exit to the right with a whole bunch of deer. Everything's going to the right. And I want to make sure that all my deer went in that direction. And it seems like they have. I'll sweep that runway real good, and I'll finish my circle out around back to my other tracks and make sure that they didn't leave anywhere else, and they definitely went that way. And now I know for sure, and I can get right back on it, and I'll follow that big group, because they'll go from barnyard to running and jumping into another barnyard.
Into another mess of tracks. And if they're in the inside, when you go to close and you're on the upwind side and the wind is coming from you into the center where all the tracks are, and you come back around to that runway and they've gone through it, and you'll know if they were in the middle when they exited and went on the big runway.
Right.
So that's another reason you sweep.
That's why I sweat that, just to make sure, because if they come through there. Now also too, you have to sweep in enough so that if a deer comes running through there, it'll leave some tracks. The other thing that I'm looking at a lot is at an intersection, I'm looking at the timeline of the tracks and which deer are on top. That's another reason.
Sometimes that's really hard to tell.
Yep. Sometimes you can't tell
in between each other's tracks, and no one will step on tracks, and it's hard to know.
Yeah, you may have to go a ways to find out which deer is in the rear.
Yep.
And you're trying to establish a timeline of which deer went through the intersection ahead of which.
Yep.
So there's going to be, especially wet, sticky snow, it's a little bit easier to do that because the tracks will be a little more on top.
And the older tracks will be a little bit more melted because if the temperature is warm enough to make the snow really sticky. The ones in the bottom will be a little bit more melted, and the new tracks will obviously be fresher. So that's also, that helps too. And they're more defined. In better, wetter snow, tracks are way more defined.
Some of the things that you're looking at, you'll start drawing a conclusion. Oh, this one's on top, this one's there, right? Some of that, you might be right, but you might also be wrong. So like I'm looking for consecutive evidence over and over. Yep, this deer's definitely on top. And I go a ways and boy, I'm not so sure again. And then I look a little bit farther and oh yeah, definitely on top. You'll see that quite a bit. And if you hunt an area in 2 or 3 days in a row, all of your tracks, like I remember all of my tracks that I made, and say overnight you got an inch of snow, and now you have your boot tracks and an inch of snow, and then along comes some deer walking in your boot tracks. One of the things about old snow is that you go back and rehunt those areas.
It's actually helpful. You have a timeline.
Because
you know how new something is.
Right, and you can say these tracks weren't here yesterday, or this track just came through behind me, or there's a guy ahead of me, and there's 2 deer behind the guy that's ahead of me.
We actually like older snow, because like brand new snow is nice, except for the fact that it makes tracks more scarce in general. Like 3 days is good. Either that or a tiny little dusting at like midnight that shuts off at midnight. From like 10 to midnight, a little dusting every night, just a tiny little bit is actually really helpful. Because then you say, well, anything that's fresh was made from midnight to when the sun
now.
came up at like 7 or 8 o'clock. So you say, well, I'm only 8 hours behind, and then you could say, oh well, it stands out more from that. Plus, you also get to see the traffic layered underneath it and how good the area is, because you can see those older tracks that are just kind of more of divots in the snow because they've been snowed in a little bit. That's the best. It's either a tiny little bit of snow or a big reset every 3-4 days.
The other thing too is just because you got snow and you go in there and you're not seeing any tracks, you could be very well going around them.
They're just laying down. We do that all the time. You're like, there's nothing here, and you're going like this because they're not moving. And then you say, let's go to a new area, and then you come back like a day or two later.
It's covered.
And it's covered.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, all the time.
But if you go in there and the snow's 4 days old and there's nothing, now you know there's nothing, right?
Don't bother.
So that's one of
come back in a week.
One of the plus sides of having that older snow is it really does give the areas, amount of usage, not only by deer but by humans, by moose, by everything.
Yeah.
You find out coyotes, right? Sometimes in Maine we'll get an area that's just loaded with coyotes, and the deer are just like, we're out of here. They just don't like that.
Or if they're in there, they're like wired.
Yep. That
they're
too.
Wired.
Yep. And I think they pester them a fair amount, and especially bucks as the season progresses. Coyotes will pester them a fair amount.
They seem to pester the buck too.
Yeah.
Like the coyotes seem to be pestering bucks and not does.
It's funny. Maybe their guard is down a little bit or something, and for some reason they seem to go after them.
I don't know.
We had them
weird.
Screw us up a couple times last year where
all the time.
the buck and the doe are tending. They're right here, and the coyotes get in there just ahead of us, and we got coyote tracks on top of our deer tracks.
On top of our tracks when we come back through.
Right, and it's like, damn, they're right here, and they're going to screw it up, and I want to run to get down there. It's too late. They've already got the deer up and chasing them.
Hey, they're just doing the same thing we're doing. I like a little competition. Let the coyotes in there, because we have one on our team. He kills a deer every year.
So, some of those are the indicators as the season progresses and the bucks slow down a little bit. Their pacing and how they walk across the landscape will be, you can tell.
Yeah.
I've been walking forever and I just got to keep trucking, and they've got
Day 30.
Yeah, they've got this, nonstop wander to them that just goes, and they can almost feel like they're going to park, but they don't.
And they
just
never
keep trucking.
Yeah.
Especially some of the giants, late season, they may still keep right on going. So it is what it is. I would have said probably 7 out of 10 times last year we were half a mile or a mile behind them all the time.
At least it felt like it.
And we were not going slow.
No, by the end of the season, you just feel like
just
running the whole time because you're
slamming.
like, I can't catch these deer. Plus, we were getting weird weather too. We were getting some warmer weather and rain, and so that also brought up a little urgency too, because you're like, these tracks are burning out and.
Right, yeah, melting. We had a bunch of melting on us as fast as we could follow them, and sometimes down low was melting, and up high was really melting,
and no snow.
By the time we
no traffic, really.
We couldn't do anything about it. They'd go down out, and we'd be done.
Yeah.
They get someplace where we just couldn't even track them in the leaves no more. They got in with a bunch of other deer, ran out across a cut where you can't see the track in the cut all that much. We had a bunch of that. You could follow them fresh in the snow, and then
in the trees.
Yeah, and then fresh in the woods even without the snow. We could still follow him pretty good because it was a monster, and he's folding the leaves in good, and then
that one down the bottom.
Yeah, and then when he gets out, into a cut, and it's all just like pine needles and soft and moss, and you can't even follow the track anymore. Or he gets underneath spruce trees, and it's real needles and hard, and we just could not follow that deer anymore. And we just kind of predicted where he was going to head, and then just hunt in that direction. But that stunk because that was an absolute giant, and like you can only do what you can do, and after that, well. But hopefully this has been a little bit of a help. I know it's one of those things that you sort of learn over time, and you also not only look at individual tracks, but you look at a series of tracks. You not just believe what little bit of evidence you saw, but look for confirmation of your evidence.
And consistency throughout the track.
Yep, and when it feels like all of a sudden he might be here someplace and your hair's standing up, ease up just a little bit. And go with the most speed and the most efficiency you can. As soon as you start your efficiency at seeing deer starts falling off and you're just jumping them, or you're not even seeing them and they're running off, well, you're going too fast. Time to slow down a little bit.
Yep.
And everybody's got a different speed at what they can go. And also, I generally pick up the speed if I'm going downwind. I don't want things to get polluted with my wind. Yeah, so hopefully as the season progresses and as your experience comes up, you'll be a little bit better at knowing, how far ahead and be able to guess it a little bit more. It's one of those things that just comes with experience and also to the pacing. One of the things about leaving a track and doing a swing is that you lose the speed of the deer and the pacing. And I hate to
if you don't have two guys, it's not really worth doing.
I don't know.
Just because unless
it depends.
No, I would say you consider swinging after you start hitting the deer over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And if the deer two-step would go out and he would hook us, and then we would jump him or something, and he would go out and do the same thing every single time.
He was
and
expecting.
We hit after 3 times. It's all right, he's gonna go down here, this distance. He's gonna go over here. He's gonna hook to that. So you know what? We're going down in, and we actually did that the day that we got him on film. The second day we were hunting him, we had hit him. He went up through the cliffs, was doing some eating, went up, hooked around, and bedded down off to the right. And we went up, and it was thick. And we're like, well, if we go through that and he's bedded down on the other end, he's going to catch us as we go through the thick stuff. So let's swing out to the left. And we went all the way up and around, and he didn't come out. So we came down halfway and then slid in through an easier spot to get through. And we looked up, and to the left through the woods on the cliff, he was laying right there.
Yeah.
And that swing actually helped, because had we gone down in on the lower side of the cliff through all the nasty
he'd
mess,
have nailed us for sure.
he'd have had the uphill advantage, and we would have been busted.
Yeah.
So that swing made sense then, but it's such a roll of the dice. It's such a gamble that swinging, you're losing your information. It
might save time, might lose
he
time.
might not do what you think he's gonna do, and then you swung and he actually went to the right, and then you end up burning a ton of time trying to hook back around to find the track, and it's like, meh.
Sometimes you're just screwed, and no matter where he is, you're not going to do anything about it, and you just got to get him out and move him.
Yeah.
And if it's at the end of the day and you don't have time to do anything about it, well, maybe you want to leave him alone and come back next day. But
Yeah.
But even then, it only takes so little, and they're so far ahead so much. You have to meet the deer, and if you never meet up with them, you're just following tracks.
Yeah, it can be tough. But one of the things I always did was I always kind of just assume he's closer than he is. I always just try to tell myself he's close. Mostly, 1, to get me to pay attention, and 2, it gets me to slow down and be a little bit more thorough. And I'd rather not catch him than to shove him and then go into that game.
If I have time, I want to.
I would rather just go nice and easy and be like, okay, and then say, oh, he did this, all right. And then if I have to get on him the next day, he still doesn't know I'm coming, and I've got that first impression, that first meeting them is when they die.
Most of the time,
that's when you get them.
Is that second one is the next best for sure.
It's like,
it won't get any better as time goes on.
I'd rather not jump him. The only good thing about jumping him is it's fresh.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're like, well, now it's time to pay attention. Oh, great.
Right.
You should have just paid attention before, and you would have got him.
Right. The trick is to be near them and hunt. That's the whole point of the whole game.
Cover as much ground as quickly as you can, and as soon as you get close, slow down, see him, shoot him. That's that's really what you're trying to do. Is you're trying to close the distance between you and him as fast and efficiently as you possibly can, and then once you get close, notice those signs of freshness in the track and all that. So then you can slow down, be thorough, spot him, catch him before he catches you, then get him.
Yeah.
And when you say it like that, it sounds really simple, but there's a lot of nuance to it, and the weather changing throughout the day affects how fresh the track looks and all this other stuff. So some things happen. So when you look at the track, you're like, oh, it still looks old.
Right.
And he is laid down. He's only 50 yards away. And you're like, I got plenty of day. I got time. He's probably a quarter mile ahead of me.
Look how melted out it is.
And then you hit him, and just because he has and then you're busted, and you're going to run into that.
Yeah. And the conditions will pressure you.
Oh yeah. Time. The clock,
not being able to see.
Yep.
If I can't see, then I want to get over here, and then I can see. I want to get over here, and then I can see. And next thing you know, I've come through a whole bunch of stuff, and he's right there, and boom, and now you're at it. But that's okay too, right? You just sometimes they got to be in a spot where they're screwed.
Yeah. The biggest takeaways, especially when you're learning tracking, is don't walk on your intersections, and pay attention to speed. That's
everything.
everything.
Have to come back and look.
If he ever stops and pauses, that's an opportunity for you to stop, take a look at the landscape, notice what the wind's doing, and be like, why would he stop here? And then that will give you context as to what he'll probably do next and where he's going to go. Mm-hmm. You know, and if he slows down, you slow down. If he's hammering, holding the line straight, you can scoot right along, because odds are he's not standing there close by watching.
And any surprises that are going to happen
are going to happen anyway
when he's going slow.
Yeah.
When he's going slow, then you're going to have a surprise. Yeah. So as soon as the pace starts decreasing, if you're sitting at a tree stand and you watch a deer come along, and you're watching him and you're saying, oh, he's going to walk through here and he's going to walk through there, and then all of a sudden he does a 90 and boom, and he's over here now. And you're like, oh, wow. Man, how did he get through that? I didn't even see him make his way through that stuff, and he popped out over here. You know, he just went out of sight right over here, headed this way, and then next thing you know, boom, he's over here. That kind of surprise stuff is what they do when they're going easy.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's when you start looking for those surprises when they're going easy.
They do what you do. You know what I mean? When you're on a mission, you're headed to the fridge, headed to the bathroom, headed to bed, you draw a straight line.
Yep.
But when you have other things and you're just doing whatever in the house, if you could see your tracks in your house, it would be these giant figure eight loops, weird stuff. But you'd have these straight runways when you had something on your mind and you were like, this is what I'm doing. And you went and did it. But when you're a little bit more like hang out and you're just like, you know, you see a time lapse of people just chatting in a room, how they kind of move around a little bit weird and they're not on a mission. You'll like loop over here and come back over and then stand there and then sit here. And they do the same things. When they're going slow, that's when you have to be careful, because they do stuff they'll double back and go over here and be over there. And you think as the track veers off to the right, you think to look in that direction because that's where they are. But if it's going slow, they could still be off to your left, because they go over here and loop and hook around and feed and just kind of wander as they're eating or look for a spot to lay down. So when they slow down, you really have to take in that 360, because they could be anywhere inside that range. But when they're hammering straight, you're more likely for them to be right out.
And you're not likely to see them.
No,
when
not
they're
normally.
hammering, they're not. It's the transition zone, intersection, deer meeting up with other deer kind of spots where you jump deer. You know, or it's a bedding spot where they crawled up in. Yeah, they crawled up in this little hole, and you know they went up in there to bed, and you know you got to go up in there to do it, and there's no easy way, and there's no quiet way, and you just got to get up in there. So you just do your best, and meanwhile they bust out and go through. You know, that's the kind of stuff. If I started paying attention to what the land was like where I jumped deer, which is another good thing you can do. Pay attention to what the type of spots are when you jump them.
How often do you think deer jump each other?
Oh, I'm sure a fair amount.
You know what I mean? Like during when there's no snow and you can't tell, and they're just walking around and they bump into each other. Are they like moose, where moose don't really jump each other?
Not too much.
You know what I mean?
I'm sure that they just
deer, like, they probably would
wait and
but
see.
Maybe like a buck would jump another buck, because you see that in the snow and stuff. But like, they're jumping because they know you're not a deer.
Right.
And they are wondering what you are.
Yep.
And then when they stop, they're wondering what you are. If
they
really thought you were a deer, they might just stand up and go, who's this? But not like run off.
Right.
So
yeah,
if they're, you know.
And most of the time, if they run off, they've already gotten a good look at you. Yeah. And you could have actually seen them as well.
Or
most of the time.
Or they're in this tight, thick spot and they just peered through this tiny little hole. Because when you put like it up to your, you can look through your fingers and see almost the whole room when your eyes close to it. Mm-hmm. But if you stand it way back, you know, them when they're bedded, they're hard to get.
Oh yeah,
they are hard to get. You shoot a deer in its bed, you've done something.
Oh yeah, not easy.
That's tough.
Yep.
But all these little things, this is all stuff you're going to notice when you really start tracking, and you're going to put together those patterns. And each deer is going to do something a little bit different. But in general, the rules of thumbs, those kind of stay. If he's going fast, you're going fast. If he stops and turns, take it in, go slow. Time to pay attention. If he slows down, you know, look at the landscape ahead of you. It's all the stuff you're just going to have to learn. Those work all the time. That's just kind of how it gets done. Yep. But you'll find his habits and his feeding habits, and you know, if he goes out and hooks and does this before he beds down, like those little character things that you'll learn on an individual deer as you hunt him. But yep. It's fun. You get to learn. It's not just where he is at what time. You learn what he does all the time, which is fun. You know, you really get to build a little bit of a backstory and a relationship with a deer as you hunt him. When you track, it's pretty unique. It's a lot of fun. You know, plus you get to at least watch a landscape go by. Won't be long now. I mean, we're burning right through September here, and
yep.
only little ways to go. It feels like deer season is closer than it actually is. I mean, bow seasons, obviously, but like rifle season and tracking, it feels closer than it actually is.
Yeah, it's
doesn't it? It feels like this is like end of October and we're getting ready to go, but we still got a little bit of time left.
Been watching too many videos.
I think that's what it is. I think it's too many videos talking deer hunting too much.
All the editing's adding up.
Yeah, people are like, don't talk about deer season too much. I'm still fishing. One of the guys commented on YouTube. It's funny.
Yeah.
But thank you guys so much for listening. Appreciate it. Appreciate you tuning in, as always, from here, Mountain Deer HQ. For those watching on YouTube, what do you think of this backdrop? What do you think of our little set here?
A little different.
This seems like a good angle. I like this. A little bit more space. It's kind of... The shop's so big and echoey. It's hard to get good audio in here. But
yep. Okay, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Dad, for
take care.
Taking us to school.
Appreciate you listening.
Appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you so much for everyone here on Team Mountain Deer. We'll see you later.
So
can't wait.
Bye-bye.
Happy hunting.